was my birthday about a week ago. Don't worry, I'll be accepting all belated happy birthdays in the comments section. On my birthday, as a tradition, I usually go to theaters to see a movie and come back home to eat some gluten-free pizza. Because God has a twisted sense of humor and cursed me to have a negative reaction to my favorite food, bread. That being said, when I was looking at the options that were available to me, nothing stood out that I hadn't already seen. I mean, what was there to be excited about? Peter Rabbit 2? The Hitman's Wife's Bodyguard? No, for my birthday, I usually try to treat myself to a good film. Then I remembered, isn't Luca on Disney Plus? I looked on the app and saw that in fact it was, and not with the dumb Premier Access tag that is essentially a paywall inside of a paywall. So I decided that Luca was the move, and I settled down on my couch to watch it. 95 minutes and one pepperoni pizza later, I came to the conclusion that it was pretty good. I liked the animation, and what it lacked in substance, it made up for in the charming aura that it embodied. And you have no idea how much of a relief that was to me, because as the release of Luca came closer and closer, I was a little bit wary about it. Why? One word: Pixar. I can already hear the raucous protests from the audience, so let me explain before I'm escorted to the guillotine. I adored Soul and have it as the second best movie of last year, so let's take that out of the equation for now, although we will come back to it. Since 2009, I truly believe that Pixar hasn't released a great film. The closest thing for me was Inside Out, which I gave a 7 out of 10, even though it's one of my biggest perpetrators of one of my issues with the company's newer efforts. Heck, even Soul falls into this issue as well. My problem with the new era of Pixar can be excised down to a couple of points. The first problem, and I think the one that is most blatant and a lot of people have discussed before, is that it seems like Pixar has lost its creativity and originality. Fun fact, 2020 was the first year since 2015 that Pixar didn't release an installment in one of their franchises. And for some reason, it's become very clear that, for whatever reason, Pixar just can't do sequels, prequels, or any type of equal that you can think of. If you look back at the track record, aside from the Toy Story franchise, which I'd argue isn't as flawless as people think, but that's for another video, there hasn't been a single sequel that Pixar has released to critical acclaim, or even that positive of a response. My heart broke a little more every single time that they slightly tarnished one of their brilliant properties by releasing a sequel that was just kinda the first movie again. I know that the plots of the films are different, but Pixar does seem to have this issue that I addressed in my review of A Quiet Place Part 2 on Letterboxd. If the first film isn't either continuing the story in an additive way, or transforming the genre and or formula in an experimental way, then the film doesn't really have a reason to exist. If you take a look at the most anticipated sequel from Pixar, The Incredibles 2, the main purpose is essentially the same. The Pars are once again trying to make it seem like superheroes are acceptable in society in order to regain their freedom and ability to exist as who they truly are. The only real difference is that the villain of the first film is one of the best animated villains of all time, and the villain of the second film is an awkwardly forced character that is a perfect example of a horribly executed twist villain. Finding Dory is just Finding Nemo, but instead of Finding Nemo, they're Finding Dory. And Cars 2 is, well, I don't even know how to start when describing Cars 2, so hopefully the name recognition provides enough context. The point is that these ideas, and by proxy the films themselves, don't hold a candle to their predecessors. In fact, you could argue, and people have, that the franchise films are made for one purpose and one purpose only: selling products. Would you like to take a guess as to how much money Pixar made off merchandise in 2018, which just so happens to be the year The Incredibles 2 came out? $1.08 billion. In 2011, the year Cars 2 was released, which is quite universally known as the worst Pixar film, the franchise alone made $10 billion. Saying that sentence out loud made me come close to vomiting. So of course they're going to be making sequels if they're making that much cash, but that should tell you a lot about what the company has become. In their early efforts, It was rather evident that they were making these films out of love, innovation, and a passion for the craft. In contrast, nowadays, they know the money both at the box office and elsewhere is in franchising their most popular and profitable products. Because of this, the film community has been a little bit hesitant to see Pixar as anything but corporate. That being said, this isn't the main reason I think Pixar has taken a decline in quality of their films, although it does play a gigantic part. My main reason for thinking that way is a pattern that I've observed in the newer Pixar films. If you look at the beginning of the company's tenure, their calling card was fantastical films with brilliant animation that tugged at your heartstrings. They were kind of like the American version of Ghibli, with the key word being American. When we got into the 2010s, it was very apparent that aside from the franchise films and The Good Dinosaur, Pixar tried to move into a more serious direction. Instead of focusing these whimsical adventures that the characters were going on, they attempted to focus more on the message and the themes of the films, which I think, personally, was a huge mistake. And I think I might be alone in this ballpark, as my main example for said idea is Inside Out, as I mentioned earlier, which is loved and critically acclaimed by almost everyone. Inside Out tries to be very deep and high concept about a subject that doesn't warrant it whatsoever. There are only a certain amount of ways that you can word and reword the statement that all emotions are necessary. Instead of taking the time to focus on the characters and world around them, which is what made the early Pixar films so excellent, the creators of Inside Out focus all of their attention on this idea, whether that be through the oblivious dialogue or the blatant symbolism. For example, I know that the film centers around the characters inside of her head, but by the end of the film, what do we actually know about Riley? She plays hockey, she just moved, she has an imaginary friend named Bing Bong, sure. But what things of significance do we know? I'd argue not that much. Sure, we know what the emotions in our head are thinking, but they're characterized as their own characters, constantly arguing over her mental space. The film spends so much time forcing the message onto you and telling you what to feel and when to feel it, when it could be focusing on fleshing out Riley, or really anyone at all. Or maybe it could spend that time building the world in a more interesting way, instead of a stop and go manner. I feel the same way about Coco too. The film spends so much time discussing the themes of never giving up on your dreams and loving your family and heritage that it doesn't really let us learn what we need to know about Miguel, other than the fact that he loves to play guitar and he loves his family. And Brave is about a bear, or something. Is all this me saying that children's films can't have deep meanings? Not at all. I just think that it's essential that if your children's film is to have a deeper meaning, that it doesn't sacrifice any other essential element. Films from the Irish studio Cartoon Saloon are perfect illustrations, as they manage to maintain the balance between childhood whimsy and serious topics such as death, dictatorships, and pillaging. The only film from Pixar that I thought was able to do a good job with this balancing act was Soul. I told you we'd get back to it. Soul tackles the subject of death and belonging, and although the comic relief is pretty annoying at points, it manages to focus on the story at hand and let the themes and message come to fruition in an organic nature. Until the final act, there's no constant line of dialogue describing the feelings and thoughts of the film is trying to elicit. Instead, it just tries to elicit them. And although I love Soul to death, it still falls under the general umbrella of my complaint of Pixar making faux deep films. So this brings us to the present day, and to why I loved Luca so much. The film is just about two dudes being friends, and maybe something more. Although there is a theme of being an outsider in Luca, it takes a backseat to the story being told and directs our full attention to the adventures of our protagonists and the beautiful, scenic landscapes of Italy. It gives off the same aura as something like Monsters Inc., Finding Nemo, or Up, which is, simply put, childlike magic. So naturally, it was quite the relief when I saw an original IP sticking so close to the films that made me fall in love with Pixar growing up. I will say though, I don't think it's a great film, but that just means that there's room for improvement, and I can't wait to see what they do with that opportunity. And maybe, just maybe, we'll finally get the film that we've been looking for years. Cars 4, baby, give me one more round of Mr. Ka-Chow on my screen, going for the Piston Cup at the ripe age of 89. Ka-chow, baby.